Euranet Plus Panorama is a weekly review of European news broadcast by our network of EU radio stations.
Hello there. In this final regular format panorama of the year, we pose two questions. Does the fall of Assad signal the end of the Syrian exodus? And will the Polish presidency give the EU the push it so badly needs? On Sunday the 8th of December, the Assad family regime, which has ruled Syria with an iron fist since 1971, collapsed following major offensives by rebel groups, of which the most important is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. President Bashar al-Assad fled the country the very same day. Syria has been embroiled in a long and bloody civil war since 2011, a war that has, according to UNHCR data, displaced more than 13 million Syrian citizens, both internally and externally. Most of the people who have left their homeland are currently living in neighbouring countries in the region, primarily Turkey. But well over 1 million have made their way to the European Union, with Germany taking in the vast majority of these. Following the downfall of the Assad regime, a number of EU member states have already suspended Syrian asylum applications. Germany, Luxembourg, France and Denmark, to name a few. Austria has even gone so far as to start making deportation plans. Anyone who is already talking about deportation has clearly not understood what is going on in Syria, said German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock in a statement on Wednesday. AMS reports.
Some of the same people who only a few weeks ago were calling for the normalization with the mass murderer Assad are now, apparently in complete ignorance, already sure that everyone can return just 48 hours after everything has changed.
Clearly, most Syrians themselves would love to return to their homeland, if their homeland was there to return to. The reality is that most of their homes have been destroyed, and the public infrastructure is in ruins. Not to mention the fact that there are, at least for the time being, no public institutions to speak of. While Belgium has not yet suspended the ability of Syrians to submit asylum applications or begun deporting them back to Syria, some 2,500 Syrian asylum seekers have had their procedures frozen. Syrians arriving in Belgium can still submit an application for international protection, but their files will not be processed. Since reception centres are already saturated, there are fears of the system collapsing. RTBF has spoken to a 27-year-old Syrian woman who fled Aleppo just over a year ago. Now living in Belgium, in a small room shared with 3 other women, she had almost reached the end of her asylum procedure. But now, because of the freeze, she will have to wait an unspecified amount of time to discover her fate.
It's destroying me because I have already have psychological problems since the war in Syria, 13 years of the war in Syria. And here I just don't know what is my fate. It's destroying that I will be waiting for unknown years or months.
This young woman is Christian, and Christianity is an ultra-minority religion in Syria. Syrian Christians have long felt unsafe, and she believes that they will be no better protected under the incoming regime. But Sophie van Baalberge, Belgium's Commissioner General for Refugees and Stateless Persons, defends the decision to put a temporary block on Syrian applications.
When there is a fundamental change of regime, followed by instability or uncertainty, we have to put things on ice. It would not be sensible for us to come to any decisions, either to grant or to refuse asylum, because we do not have enough information to do so.
And Peter Tanev, a career diplomat and expert on the Middle East, tells Bulgarian National Radio that he backs this course of action.
What a number of European countries have decided is, in my opinion, an adequate and correct measure, namely to stop processing applications for humanitarian protection and refugee status.
The question is more, what will the EU and its member states do next? The newly inaugurated EU Foreign Policy Chief, Kaja Kallas, who has certainly had a busy first few weeks in office, tells Estonian member station Kuku Radio that as far as Syria is concerned, we essentially need to wait and see.
What is in Europe's interest? That refugee flows stop and refugees can go back home, and certainly that there are no new refugees owing to fears of different groups being persecuted. For now, these developments are positive. People are happy about the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. We have to give the new names time. Their actions will show whether they are going in the right direction. All the regional players, and also we, the international community, are keeping a very close eye on this to make sure that things go in the right direction.
Belgium's new foreign minister, Bernard Quentin, is also keen not to dampen the mood too soon, as he tells RTBF.
The first thing we must do with the Syrian people is to celebrate this new situation. After all, this marks the end of 50 years, more than 50 years, of horrible dictatorship. You will have seen the images of that prison just as I have, and remember that this is a regime that has not thought twice about gassing its own population on several occasions. So firstly, let's give the Syrians the chance to rejoice at this change, and secondly, let's analyse the facts and the actions of this new power that is being established, a power that is made up of a whole range of different rebel groups.
On the subject of these rebel groups, Latvia's radio speaks to Toms Hartfelders, a political researcher and analyst specialising in Middle Eastern security. He cautions that things are unlikely to go entirely smoothly, even though Assad has gone, because there is almost always infighting between such groups.
Everything will depend on how much these rebel groups are able to cooperate when their common enemy is gone. Historically, we know that nothing unites us as well as a common enemy. If this enemy disappears, other interests emerge that may not always be compatible. We must always remember that Syria is very heterogeneous, very diverse. Each of the denominations, the religious groups, has its own interests. Reconciling them may not be as easy as all that.
And to close this topic, Primož Štěrbenc, a Middle East expert at the University of Primorska in Slovenia, tells RTV Slovenia of his fears that EU member states may cut some corners in their due diligence in their eagerness to return Syrian refugees.
EU member states will not be too strict about the state of democracy in Syria. They will not be overly fussy before declaring that Syria is now stable, because, as we can see, there is a right-wing trend gathering steam in the European Union. Since radical right-wing populist parties are gaining strength, the imperative will be to send Syrian refugees back. In this sense, the criteria for defining when the Syrian state is stable and when it is not will not be so important.
In other news, Warsaw has adopted its programme for the Polish presidency of the European Council in the first half of next year. It includes more than 300 meetings, 22 informal councils and 40,000 guests. The slogan of the presidency is Security Europe. Poland's EU Affairs Minister, Adam Żłapka, explains the rationale for this, and his comments are shared by Polski Radio.
Security is what we will be focusing on. This is a word that we will be using in all contexts during our presidency. Today, at the Council of Ministers, we adopted the 6-month plan for our presidency, covering precisely these key challenges that we are talking about, and also outlining how our core priorities will be developed in the 10 sectoral councils.
As Żłapka suggests, Poland intends to focus member states' action on strengthening European security in all its dimensions, in terms of defence, people and borders, resistance to foreign interference and disinformation, business and trade, energy, agriculture, and public health. After a meeting with European Parliament top dog Roberta Metsola last Thursday, the 5th of December, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk indicated that, in the face of global geopolitical challenges, Poland would use this 6-month term to encourage Europe to be more selfish in ensuring its own security.
Security in many dimensions. Energy. Energy as one of the main conditions for regaining full competitiveness for the European Union. Protection of the various groups of our citizens. Fair competition where Europe really does have a chance to win against anyone in the world. But this also sometimes requires assertiveness. Europe needs to be more selfish, more supportive of one another internally, and more selfish towards its opponents or adversaries. I am convinced that this is where we will find agreement.
For Austrian S&D member Andreas Schieder, Warsaw needs to focus its efforts chiefly on Europe's economic and industrial security, as he tells our colleagues at Agora.
The great challenge for the upcoming Polish presidency will be to bring European industrial policy back to the fore and to ensure that economic growth, which is currently stagnating, picks up again and that highly skilled jobs are retained in Europe. This means that the Polish presidency will need to take the first important political steps in this direction, together with the Commission. It is also important to ensure that production returns to Europe and that Europe's security of supply is guaranteed, for example, its supply of medicines. And we also need to ensure that there are jobs. The crisis in the German automotive industry, in particular, shows that we need to pay more attention to European industry as a whole, and the beginning of next year will be a crucial time for this. Poland will therefore have to take the essential and appropriate steps.
And finally, given that the Poles are no longer on the closest of terms with their Ukrainian neighbours owing to the dispute over Ukrainian grain imports, how is the Polish presidency likely to affect Ukraine? Zhiniu Radias puts this question to Andrzej Puchto, a political scientist at Vytautas Magnus University. In his view, whatever the tensions between Warsaw and Kyiv, there is no doubt that the Polish presidency will be far better for the Ukrainians than the Hungarian one was.
When you weigh up all the pros and cons, Poland's position towards Ukraine is definitely much more favourable than Hungary's. Poland certainly has a very clear vision of how to help Ukraine and how to clarify bilateral relations. I think that the presidency will be very active here.
According to Tomasz Orłowski, who was Poland's ambassador to Paris and also Rome, the defence of Ukraine will not be swept under the carpet over the coming 6 months. Orłowski is speaking, in Italian, to our Radio 24 colleagues in Milan.
On the day that we commemorated 1,000 days of war, Tusk said that defending Ukraine meant defending Poland, because we, the people of Poland, are also experiencing fatigue for having a war on our doorstep, for having Ukrainian refugees in our country. This is the message that we're trying to convey to our allies, and we're really happy that the majority of these allies share Poland's concerns and views.
So, we'll see what the next 6 months will bring. That's all for today. For next week's Panorama, we'll have a special guest, Irache García Pérez, leader of the European Parliament's Socialists and Democrats group. Tune in to find out what she has to say on a range of EU-related topics.